Seraphine's heart thrummed in sync with the steady vibrations of her scout ship, the Radiant Dawn, as it approached Earth's atmosphere. She gazed out the viewport, where the curvature of the blue planet gradually came into view. Even from orbit, Earth was dazzling, like a jewel set in the velvety blackness of space. For a brief moment, she allowed herself a flicker of admiration. It was a beautiful world, one that her people had been monitoring from afar for over a century. The ship's AI companion, Luma, chirped in a soothing tone, approaching designated landing coordinates. Atmospheric entry in 60 seconds. Seraphine exhaled, her bioluminescent skin shimmering faintly with the hues of anxiety. This was her mission, her chance to prove herself to the Nixian High Council. Earth was the last hope for her people, who had long since exhausted the resources of their own world. The humans were technologically primitive by Nixian standards, but their planet was lush with the elements necessary to sustain Nixia's dying ecosystem. Luma, run final diagnostics on our translation algorithms, she commanded, her voice firm but tinged with apprehension. All systems functioning within optimal parameters, Luma replied. The humans will understand you perfectly, Ambassador Seraphine. She appreciated Luma's confidence, even if she didn't share it. The Nixian people were a peaceful race, known for their deep empathy and advanced knowledge of energy manipulation. But humans were unpredictable and, if the intelligence reports were to be believed, they were prone to violence and greed. As the ship descended through the thickening clouds, the cityscape of New York came into focus. Towers of steel and glass rose like glittering monoliths, their windows reflecting the late afternoon sun. The landing protocols guided her to a designated area within Central Park, which had been cleared for her arrival. A crowd of onlookers had gathered behind barriers, eager to catch a glimpse of the alien envoy. The ship touched down with a gentle thud, and the landing ramp extended with a hiss of hydraulics. Taking a deep breath, Seraphine stepped out into the open air. The sensory overload was immediate. Earth's atmosphere was thick with scents and sounds, the air far denser than she was accustomed to. A gust of wind tousled her silver hair, and the sunlight made her skin glow faintly, an effect that seemed to fascinate the humans staring at her. A delegation of Earth officials awaited her at the base of the ramp, led by Dr. Ilara Hayes, the head of the United Nations Space Relations Division. Dr. Hayes was a tall, composed woman with graying hair tied back into a neat bun, her eyes sharp with curiosity behind rimless glasses. She stepped forward with a warm smile and extended her hand, a gesture that Seraphine had practiced extensively in simulations. "Welcome to Earth, Ambassador Seraphine," Dr. Hayes said, her voice smooth and confident. "We are deeply honored to host you." Seraphine hesitated for a fraction of a second before taking the offered hand. The human skin was warm, the touch foreign but not unpleasant. "Thank you, Dr. Hayes." "The honor is mine," Seraphine replied, her Nixian accent almost imperceptible thanks to the translation device embedded in her neck. The crowd erupted into applause, and the camera drones hovering above captured every moment. Seraphine's bioluminescent skin glimmered in response to the excitement around her, a subtle display of her people's natural beauty. But beneath her serene exterior, she couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched not by curious eyes, but by something far more calculating. "Please, follow us," Dr. Hayes said, gesturing towards a sleek black vehicle waiting nearby. "We've prepared a welcoming feast in your honor at the United Nations headquarters." Seraphine's smile faltered, just for an instant. The word feast hung heavy in her mind. Her people had briefed her extensively on Earth's customs, especially the human tradition of hospitality. According to Nixian intel, the concept of inviting someone to dinner was a way of showing trust and forging alliances. But Seraphine's people consumed only light and energy. The idea of eating solid food, and of doing so in front of these humans, was not just alien but deeply unsettling. "Of course," she said, her voice steady. "I look forward to it." As they made their way to the waiting car, the human officials surrounded her like a protective shield. The journey through the city was surreal. Tall skyscrapers loomed over them, their reflective surfaces catching the last rays of the setting sun. Crowds thronged the sidewalks, their faces pressed against the glass barriers to catch a glimpse of the alien ambassador. Children waved excitedly, while others held up signs that read "Welcome to Earth" and "Peace among worlds." Dr. Hayes watched Seraphine closely, her expression polite but probing. "You must find all of this quite different from your home, Ambassador." "It is, more vibrant than I imagined," Seraphine admitted, her eyes scanning the chaotic beauty outside. "Our world is much more serene." Dr. Hayes smiled. "I hope you'll find that Earth has its own charms. Our cultures are diverse, our people resilient. But tonight, we've planned something special, a chance for you to experience a taste of our traditions." Seraphine nodded, though her stomach churned at the thought. The intel reports had mentioned Earth's obsession with consuming various forms of life, but surely they would not expect her to partake. The Nixian High Council had insisted she at least pretend to eat if offered, as a sign of goodwill, but she couldn't imagine how she would stomach such a barbaric act. The vehicle pulled up to the United Nations headquarters, an imposing structure surrounded by manicured gardens and guarded by heavily armed security personnel. Seraphine could sense the tension in the air. Humans were nervous, too, even if they masked it well. As she stepped out, the grand entrance doors opened, revealing an opulent hall filled with dignitaries from every corner of Earth. The scent of roasted meats and spiced dishes hit her like a physical force, making her instinctively recoil. But she caught herself, straightened her posture, and walked forward with the grace expected of a Nixian ambassador. Dr. Hayes led her to the head of a long, ornate table, where the banquet was already in full swing. The room buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the clinking of glassware. Seraphine was seated at the center, an honored guest among Earth's elite. Plates of food were placed in front of her, each one more elaborate than the last. "Please," Dr. Hayes said, lifting her glass in a toast. "To the beginning of a new era of cooperation between our worlds." The others followed suit, raising their glasses with smiles that, to Seraphine, seemed just a little too eager. She lifted her own glass of crimson liquid wine, they had called it, and took a tentative sip. It was sharp, both sweet and bitter, and the unfamiliar taste sent a jolt through her system. But it was nothing compared to what lay ahead. As the first course was served, Seraphine realized that she would have to do more than sip a strange liquid. The humans were watching her, waiting to see how she would respond to their gesture of hospitality. Taking a deep breath, she reached for the silver fork beside her plate, praying silently that her people's training had prepared her for whatever awaited. The humans had promised her a taste of Earth, but they hadn't warned her of the price. The grand banquet hall of the United Nations was a dazzling display of Earth's opulence. Chandeliers dripped with crystals that refracted the warm glow of 100 lights, casting the room in a golden hue. The air was thick with the mingled scents of spices, roasted meats, and floral perfumes, overwhelming Seraphine's senses. She forced herself to remain calm as the humans bustled around her, eager to please their exotic guest. Seated at the head of the long, ornate table, Seraphine tried to center herself. The humans had gone to great lengths to make her feel welcome, but to a Nixian, a species that subsisted solely on energy absorption, the concept of consuming solid food was as alien as it was distasteful. Dr. Elara Hayes, who had appointed herself as Seraphine's Earth liaison, leaned in with an almost conspiratorial smile. "I hope you're prepared for a culinary adventure, Ambassador. We've curated dishes from around the world, a true showcase of Earth's cultural diversity." "Of course," Seraphine said with a diplomatic smile, her bioluminescent skin flickering faintly in shades of green, a color Nixians associated with caution. "I am honored by the effort your people have made." In truth, she was not prepared at all. The human obsession with consuming organic matter was incomprehensible to her. Back on Nixia, they sustained themselves by absorbing light and harnessing ambient energy fields. There was no waste, no violence, no taking of life. Yet here she was, surrounded by a species that thrived on the consumption of other living things. The servers moved with military precision, placing the first course in front of each guest. A plate was set before Seraphine, an artfully arranged medley of delicate rolls wrapped in seaweed, dotted with tiny orange spheres that glistened like jewels. Salmon roast sushi, Dr. Hayes explained, her eyes gleaming with pride. A delicacy from Japan. Seraphine stared at the plate, trying not to let her unease show. The sushi was beautifully presented, but she couldn't ignore what she knew: those tiny orbs were once part of a living creature, harvested before they could even hatch. Taking a deep breath, she lifted her fork and picked up one of the rolls. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as she brought it to her lips. The texture was slippery and strange, and as she bit down, the eggs burst in her mouth, releasing a briny, salty taste that flooded her senses. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced, not entirely unpleasant, but deeply foreign. She forced herself to swallow, her throat tightening as the humans around her watched with eager eyes. "Delicious," she managed to say, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her mind. A round of applause erupted, the humans clearly pleased with her performance. Dr. Hayes gave her a nod of approval, her smile widening. "I'm so glad you enjoyed it, Ambassador. Now, let's move on to the main course." More servers appeared, replacing the sushi plates with new dishes. This time, it was a platter of roasted meat, seared to perfection and garnished with fragrant herbs. The scent alone made Seraphine's head swim. She had read about this steak, they called it. The flesh of a terrestrial creature that humans had domesticated and farmed for the sole purpose of slaughtering for food. "You must try this," a portly man to her right urged, leaning in with a wide grin. "It's Wagyu beef, the finest on the planet." Seraphine hesitated, her hand hovering over the knife and fork. She could feel the eyes of the entire room on her, watching to see how she would react. The Nixian Council had been explicit: she was to partake in Earth's customs, no matter how strange, in order to foster goodwill. But the thought of eating a once-living being was enough to make her stomach churn. Still, she had a mission to fulfill. Her people were counting on her to secure an alliance with Earth, to gain access to the resources that could save Nixia from ecological collapse. Gritting her teeth, she sliced off a small piece of the meat, trying not to think of the creature it had once been. As she placed it in her mouth, an explosion of flavors assaulted her taste buds. But there was something else. A warmth, a rush of energy that coursed through her veins. The sensation was almost intoxicating, a surge of vitality that made her pulse quicken. For a moment, she was taken aback. How could mere flesh contain such potent energy? On Nixia, they had spent centuries mastering energy extraction, yet this was something else entirely. Dr. Hayes leaned closer, her eyes glinting with satisfaction. "It's quite remarkable, isn't it? Our livestock is enhanced with bionutrients, designed to maximize flavor and nutritional benefits." Seraphine nodded mechanically, trying to mask the confusion swirling in her mind. She took another bite, and the sensation intensified. The humans were consuming something far more potent than just animal flesh. This meat was infused with a life force, a concentrated energy that was far richer than anything she had encountered on Nixia. A ripple of unease slithered down her spine. What exactly were they feeding her? "Ambassador, you must try the wine," urged another delegate, sliding a glass toward her. "A perfect pairing with the steak." Seraphine lifted the glass to her lips, the deep red liquid shimmering in the ambient light. As the wine touched her tongue, it was as though a bolt of electricity shot through her. The flavors were complex, layered with hints of fruit, spice, and something darker that she couldn't quite place. And beneath it all was that same rush of energy, an almost addictive warmth that made her feel stronger. She set the glass down, her mind racing. The humans were clearly hiding something. The levels of bioenergy in their food were unnatural, far beyond what should be possible from simple organic matter. She glanced around the table, trying to gauge the expressions of the other delegates. Were they aware of what they were consuming, or was this some kind of experiment designed specifically for her? Dr. Hayes was watching her intently, her smile never faltering. "I hope you're enjoying our hospitality, Ambassador," she said smoothly. "We wanted to make your first experience of Earth unforgettable." "It is, certainly memorable," Seraphine replied, forcing a smile. Her bioluminescent skin shimmered in shades of pale yellow, a color that on Nixia conveyed polite caution. She needed to get to the bottom of this, to understand what the humans were hiding. As the meal continued, dish after dish was presented, each one more decadent than the last. Seraphine played along, tasting small portions and feigning delight, all the while feeling a growing sense of unease. The humans seemed too eager, their smiles too wide, their eyes glimmering with something she couldn't quite place. Finally, as dessert was served, an elaborate concoction of chocolate and cream, Dr. Hayes leaned in once more. "I must say, you've handled our cuisine remarkably well, Ambassador. Far better than we anticipated." Seraphine's eyes narrowed. "Why would you anticipate otherwise, Dr. Hayes? Is there something unique about your food that I should be aware of?" The human woman's smile widened ever so slightly, a flicker of something predatory in her gaze. "Oh, it's just that we've found most visitors from other worlds struggle with the richness of our nutritional enhancements. But you've taken to it quite naturally." Seraphine's heart skipped a beat. There was the confirmation she had feared. The humans were testing her, perhaps even trying to gauge her species' tolerance for whatever they had infused into their food. She needed to get out of here, to analyze the samples in private and understand what they were truly feeding her. "Thank you, Dr. Hayes," Seraphine said, rising from her seat. "But if you'll excuse me, I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. I think I'll retire for the evening." Dr. Hayes nodded, but her eyes never left Seraphine's. "Of course, Ambassador. We wouldn't want to overtax our guest. But I do hope this is the beginning of a fruitful partnership between our worlds." Seraphine offered a polite nod before turning away, her mind racing with questions. She had come to Earth seeking an alliance, but now she feared she had walked into a trap. Whatever secrets the humans were hiding, she was determined to uncover them before it was too late. Seraphine's quarters aboard the Radiant Dawn were a stark contrast to the lavish opulence of the banquet hall she had just escaped. The quiet hum of her ship's engines and the soft, steady glow of Nixian energy lights were a welcome relief after the overwhelming sensory assault of the human feast. As she leaned against the smooth metal walls, her mind raced, replaying the evening's events. Luma, the ship's AI, chimed in as the door sealed shut behind her. "Welcome back, Ambassador Seraphine. You appear distressed. Do you require assistance?" "Yes, Luma," Seraphine said, her voice tight with suppressed tension. "I need a full analysis on the samples I collected from the banquet." She pulled out a small vial containing remnants of the meat and wine she had secretly stored during the meal. While pretending to eat, she had discreetly used her suit's hidden compartment to extract samples of the food. Now, she needed answers. Whatever humans were consuming, it was far more than mere sustenance. Luma extended a robotic arm from the wall, taking the vials with a delicate touch. Initiating biochemical analysis. Estimated time to completion, 3 minutes. Seraphine paced the small chamber, her bioluminescent skin pulsing in waves of blue and green, the colors of anxiety and contemplation. She couldn't shake off the sensation that she had been a pawn in some elaborate human game. The way they watched her at the banquet, the peculiar rush of energy she had felt, it was more than simple hospitality. It was a test, and she was the subject. Her thoughts were interrupted by Luma's voice. "Analysis complete. Displaying results." A holographic screen materialized in front of her, filled with data streams and molecular breakdowns. Seraphine's eyes widened as she read the report. The results were staggering. The steak she had consumed was not just ordinary animal meat. It was infused with a bioengineered compound, something far beyond the capabilities of standard human agriculture. The meat contained traces of a substance that resonated with the same energy frequencies Nixians used to sustain themselves. But the compound was different. It was denser, more potent, and disturbingly sentient. "What is this compound?" Seraphine whispered, leaning closer to the holographic display. Luma's voice was calm but tinged with concern. "The compound appears to be derived from bioorganic matter, but it is infused with a highly concentrated form of life energy. Preliminary scans indicate it is not native to Earth. The closest match in our database suggests it may originate from sentient beings." Seraphine's heart dropped. The realization was like a punch to the gut. The humans were not just consuming animals, they were harvesting life essence from sentient beings. But where had they obtained such a resource? And why were they feeding it to her? A sudden sense of urgency filled her. She needed more information, but accessing Earth's databases remotely from her ship would raise alarms. If she wanted answers, she would have to return to the human facility, but this time under the cover of darkness. The night was still and cold as Seraphine exited the radiant dawn in her stealth suit, a sleek garment that cloaked her bioluminescence and masked her presence from human surveillance systems. New York City, so vibrant and chaotic during the day, had an eerie stillness at this hour. The towering skyscrapers seemed to watch her as she navigated through the shadows. Using the data she had intercepted earlier, Seraphine made her way to a secure research wing of the United Nations headquarters. This was where Dr. Hayes and her team had likely conducted their experiments on the bioengineered substances. If Seraphine could access their servers, she might uncover the truth behind the human conspiracy. As she slipped through the security checkpoints with practiced ease, her mind kept replaying the banquet. The humans' eager eyes, the way they had watched her consume their food, they had been waiting for a reaction, a confirmation that their experiment had succeeded. But what was their true goal? Seraphine found her way to a secured lab at the end of a dimly lit corridor. The door was locked with a biometric scanner, but her Nixian technology made quick work of it. The door slid open silently, revealing a room filled with rows of glass cylinders, each containing various biological specimens. Her eyes narrowed as she approached a console at the center of the room. With Luma's guidance, she quickly bypassed the security protocols and accessed the files stored on the human servers. What she found sent chills down her spine. The humans had been experimenting with extraterrestrial life forms for years, harvesting their bioenergy to create enhancements for their own species. According to the files, they had captured numerous sentient beings from other star systems, subjecting them to horrific experiments. The meat served at the banquet had been derived from these beings, their essence distilled into a form that humans could consume for enhanced strength, longevity, and mental acuity. Worse still, the files indicated that the humans had discovered that Nixians were particularly compatible with their enzyme. The data from her own consumption at the feast was already being analyzed to refine their formula. "They were testing me," Seraphine muttered, her voice trembling with rage. "They wanted to see if I would become addicted to their abomination." Luma's voice crackled in her earpiece. "Ambassador, we have limited time before their security systems detect your presence. I recommend retrieving any crucial data and exiting immediately." Seraphine's fingers danced over the console, downloading everything she could find about Project Immortal Harvest, the code name for the humans' twisted experiments. Just as she finished, alarms blared throughout the facility, and red lights flashed ominously. "They've detected me," she said, sprinting toward the exit. "Luma, prepare the ship for an emergency takeoff." As she darted through the corridors, security forces swarmed into the building, their footsteps echoing like a drumbeat behind her. Seraphine's Nixian agility allowed her to stay ahead, but she knew it wouldn't be long before they closed in. She needed to get back to the Radiant Dawn before they could capture her. Bursting through the exit doors, Seraphine activated her suit's thrusters, launching herself into the air. The ship hovered just above the treetops, its cloaking field flickering as it waited for her. She landed on the ramp, and the hatch sealed shut behind her as the engines roared to life. Engage warp drive, she commanded, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. We need to get this information to the Nixian Council. As the stars streaked into lines outside the viewport, Seraphine allowed herself a moment of relief. But the reality of what she had uncovered weighed heavily on her. The humans were not just a threat to Nixia, they were a threat to every sentient species in the galaxy. They had discovered a way to harness the very essence of life, turning it into a weapon of control and consumption. But now, Seraphine had the evidence. And she would ensure that her people and the rest of the galaxy knew the truth. In her mind, one thing was clear: the humans had made a grave mistake in thinking they could manipulate the Nixians. The war they had inadvertently started would not end in their favor. The familiar, shimmering stars of Nixia's home system filled the viewport as the radiant dawn exited warp space. Seraphine sat in the captain's chair, her fingers drumming anxiously on the console. She had just returned from Earth, bearing the horrific truth of humanity's twisted experiments. The encrypted data she had risked her life to steal from the humans now resided safely in her ship's databanks. But exposing it to the Nixian High Council would not be easy. Luma's voice broke the silence. Ambassador Seraphine, we are receiving a high-priority communication from the Council. They demand an immediate debriefing. Patch them through to the main screen, Seraphine replied, her bioluminescent skin glowing in shades of tense red. The Council would not be pleased that her diplomatic mission had turned into a covert investigation, nor that it had escalated into a potential conflict with a planet they had hoped would become an ally. The screen flickered to life, revealing the stern faces of the Nixian High Council. Their translucent skin glowed with shades of blue, a stark contrast to the alarm that filled Seraphine's own visage. At the center of the screen was Grand Consul Thalios, whose silver eyes bored into her with an intensity that made her momentarily falter. Ambassador Seraphine, Thalios began, his voice cold and clipped, we expected you to return with news of a successful alliance. Instead, we have received reports that you departed Earth under hostile conditions. Explain yourself. Seraphine took a deep breath, steadying herself. Honored Council, I regret to inform you that the humans are not the benevolent partners we believed them to be. I uncovered evidence of their heinous practices. They are experimenting on sentient beings, harvesting their life energy to enhance their own physical and mental capabilities. She transmitted the encrypted data to the Council's secure network. As the files began to download, the expressions of the Council members shifted from skepticism to horror. The room behind Thalios erupted into hushed, urgent whispers. This cannot be, one of the counselors muttered, her glowing skin flickering in disbelief. If this data is accurate, the humans have committed unspeakable atrocities. Thalios narrowed his eyes at Seraphine. You are certain of this information, Ambassador? The consequences of your accusations are severe. You risk igniting a conflict that could devastate both our worlds. I am certain, Grand Consul, Seraphine replied firmly. The humans have already begun to refine their bioenhancements using Nixian-compatible enzymes. If we do nothing, it is only a matter of time before they enslave our people to feed their insatiable hunger. A tense silence filled the air. Then, Thalios nodded gravely. We will verify this data. Until then, you are ordered to remain in orbit. Any unauthorized actions could jeopardize the safety of our entire species. The screen went dark, leaving Seraphine alone with her thoughts. She understood the Council's caution, but she also knew time was running out. The humans would not sit idly by after discovering that she had stolen their secrets. It was only a matter of time before they retaliated, perhaps even with an invasion of Nixia itself. Earth, United Nations headquarters back on Earth, Dr. Alara Hayes stormed into a high-security meeting room deep within the United Nations complex. The atmosphere was thick with tension as members of the clandestine Project Immortal Harvest convened. Seated around the table were generals, scientists, and top officials, their faces drawn and grim. She got away with the data, Dr. Hayes spat, her usually composed demeanor frayed at the edges. The Nixian ambassador knows everything. A heavily decorated general, his face lined with age and worry, leaned forward. How much damage can she do with that information? Our people won't take kindly to hearing that we've been experimenting on sentient beings. It's not just damage control, another scientist interjected. If the Nixians discover how effective their enzymes are in boosting human capabilities, they could weaponize it against us. We must act swiftly. Hayes clenched her fists. I agree. The ambassador is en route to Nixia, but we have a contingency plan in place. We've already activated Project Echo. The enzyme is being dispersed into Nixia's atmosphere as we speak. Within days, their entire population will become dependent on it, just as we planned. The general nodded, a cruel smile spreading across his face. If we can't secure them as allies, we'll make them addicts. They'll have no choice but to surrender their planet and resources to us. Orbiting Nixia, the radiant dawn. In the dimly lit control room, Seraphine's hands tightened into fists as she listened to the transmission she had intercepted. The humans' plan was even worse than she had imagined. They weren't just harvesting life, they were turning the entire Nixian population into addicts, using the enzyme as a weapon of control. We have no time, Luma, Seraphine said, her voice a low growl. If the humans disperse their enzyme into our atmosphere, we will be enslaved to them without even realizing it. Agreed, Luma replied. However, the Council has forbidden any direct action. You are under orders to await their decision. Seraphine's bioluminescent skin flared a deep, angry red. The Council can deliberate all they want, but I will not sit by and watch my people fall into slavery. With a quick series of commands, she disengaged the ship's communication link with the Council. Luma, initiate a course for the source of the human dispersal system. It's time we take matters into our own hands. Warning, Luma said, her voice tinged with concern. Disobeying direct orders from the High Council could result in your exile. I'd rather be exiled than see my people turned into slaves, Seraphine replied, her eyes blazing with resolve. Now, prepare the ship for combat. The final battle. The source of the enzyme dispersal was located on an orbital platform hidden within the asteroid belt near Nixia. As the radiant dawn approached, Seraphine could see the dark silhouette of the human station, surrounded by a fleet of heavily armed defense drones. It was a fortress designed to withstand an assault, but Seraphine was determined to break through. Luma, divert all power to shields and weapon systems, Seraphine ordered. We need to destroy that platform before they can activate full dispersal. The ship shuddered as enemy drones unleashed a barrage of plasma fire. Seraphine's hands moved with lightning speed, guiding her ship through evasive maneuvers while firing back with concentrated energy blasts. The Nixian technology was superior, but the humans had numbers on their side. Ambassador, we have detected the dispersal mechanism powering up, Luma warned. We have less than 3 minutes before the enzyme release. Seraphine's jaw tightened. Not on my watch. She unleashed a concentrated energy beam at the platform's core, targeting the dispersal mechanism. Explosions rippled through the structure, sending shockwaves that rocked the human fleet. With one final blast, the dispersal system erupted in a blinding burst of light, sending fragments of the platform hurtling into space. Target destroyed, Luma confirmed. The enzyme dispersal has been neutralized. Seraphine slumped back in her seat, her bioluminescence flickering as adrenaline drained from her system. She had done it. She had stopped the humans' plan to enslave her people. But her relief was short-lived as the communication console crackled to life. The stern face of Grand Consul Thalios appeared once more. Ambassador Seraphine, you have disobeyed direct orders. Your actions have put Nixia at risk. I did what I had to do to protect our people, Seraphine shot back, her eyes burning with defiance. The humans will not stop until they control us. We must act now, or we will lose everything. Thalios was silent for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, he gave a slow nod. You have proven your resolve, Ambassador. Return to Nixia. The Council will reconsider its position and prepare for the war that is now inevitable. As the screen went dark, Seraphine allowed herself a rare smile. The humans had underestimated her, but they would not make that mistake again. The Nixians were prepared to defend their world, and this time they would not fight alone. The reckoning had begun.